It was strange, Rand thought as he shifted uncomfortably on the bed. A week ago, he would have been downstairs like a falling rock for just the chance he might see a Gleeman perform, for just the rumor of it. But he had heard Tom tell his stories every night for a week, and Tom would be there tomorrow night and the next. And the hot bath had loosened kinks in muscles that he had thought would be there forever. And his first hot meal in a week oozed lethargy into him. Sleepily, he wondered if Lan really did know the false dragon Loghain. A muffled shout came from below stairs, the common room greeting Tom's arrival. But Rand was already asleep. The stone hallway was dim and shadowy, and empty except for Rand. He could not tell where the light came from, what little there was of it. The gray walls were bare of candles or lamps, nothing at all to account for the faint glow that seemed to just be there. The air was still and dank, and somewhere in the distance water dripped with a steady, hollow plonk. Wherever this was, it was not the inn. Frowning, he rubbed at his forehead. Inn? His head hurt, and thoughts were hard to hold on to. There had been something about an inn? It was gone, whatever it was. He licked his lips and wished he had something to drink. He was awfully thirsty, dry as dust thirsty. It was the dripping sound that decided him. With nothing to choose by except his thirst, he started toward that steady plonk, plonk, plonk. The hallway stretched on, without any crossing corridor, and without the slightest change in appearance. The only features at all were the rough doors set at regular intervals in pairs, one on either side of the hall, the wood splintered and dry despite the damp in the air. The shadows receded ahead of him, staying the same, and the dripping never came any closer. After a long time, he decided to try one of those doors. It opened easily, and he stepped through into a grim, stone-walled chamber. One wall opened in a series of arches onto a gray stone balcony, and beyond that was a sky such as he had never seen. Striated clouds in blacks and grays, reds and oranges streamed by as if storm winds drove them, weaving and interweaving endlessly. No one could ever have seen a sky like that. It could not exist. He pulled his eyes away from the balcony, but the rest of the room was no better. Odd curves and peculiar angles, as if the chamber had been melted almost haphazardly out of the stone, and columns that seemed to grow out of the gray floor. Flames roared on the hearth like a forge fire with the bellows pumping, but gave no heat. Strange oval stones made the fireplace. They just looked like stones, wet-slick despite the fire when he looked straight at them. But when he glimpsed them from the corner of his eye, they seemed to be faces instead. The faces of men and women writhing in anguish, screaming silently. The high-backed chairs and the polished table in the middle of the room were perfectly ordinary, but that in itself emphasized the rest. A single mirror hung on the wall, but that was not ordinary at all. When he looked at it, he saw only a blur where his reflection should have been. Everything else in the room was shown true, but not him. A man stood in front of the fireplace. He had not noticed the man when he first came in. If he had not known it was impossible, he would have said no one had been there until he actually looked at the man. Dressed in dark clothes of a fine cut, he seemed in the prime of his maturity, and Rand supposed women would have found him good-looking. "Once more we meet face to face," the man said, and, just for an instant, his mouth and eyes became openings into endless caverns of flame. With a yell, Rand hurled himself backwards out of the room, so hard that he stumbled across the hall and banged into the door there, knocking it open. He twisted and grabbed at the door handle to keep from falling to the floor, and found himself staring wide-eyed into a stone room with an impossible sky through the arches leading to a balcony and a fireplace. "You cannot get away from me that easily," the man said. Rand twisted, scrambling back out of the room, trying to regain his feet without slowing down. This time there was no corridor. He froze, half-crouched, not far from the polished table, and looked at the man by the fireplace. It was better than looking at the fireplace stones or at the sky. "This is a dream," he said as he straightened. Behind him he heard the click of the door closing. "It's some kind of nightmare." He shut his eyes, thinking about waking up. When he was a child, the wisdom had said if you could do that in a nightmare, it would go away. The wisdom? What? If only his thoughts would stop sliding away. If only his head would stop hurting. Then he could think straight. He opened his eyes again. The room was still as it had been, the balcony, the sky, the man by the fireplace. "Is it a dream?" the man said. "Does it matter?" Once again, for a moment, his mouth and eyes became peepholes into a furnace that seemed to stretch forever. His voice did not change. He did not seem to notice it happening at all. Rand jumped a little this time, but managed to keep from yelling. "This is a dream. It has to be." All the same, he stepped backwards all the way to the door, never taking his eyes off the fellow by the fire, and tried the handle. It did not move. The door was locked. "You seem thirsty," the man by the fire said. "Drink." On the table was a goblet, shining gold and ornamented with rubies and amethysts. It had not been there before. He wished he could stop jumping. It was only a dream. His mouth felt like dust. "I am, a little," he said, picking up the goblet. The man leaned forward intently, one hand on the back of a chair, watching him. The smell of spiced wine drove home to Rand just how thirsty he was, as if he had had nothing to drink in days. "Have I?" With the wine halfway to his mouth, he stopped. Whispers of smoke were rising from the chair back between the man's fingers, and those eyes watched him so sharply, flickering rapidly in and out of flames. Rand licked his lips and put the wine back on the table untasted. "I'm not as thirsty as I thought." The man straightened abruptly, his face without expression. His disappointment could not have been more plain if he had cursed. Rand wondered what was in the wine. But that was a stupid question, of course. This was all a dream. Then why won't it stop? "What do you want?" he demanded. "Who are you?" Flames rose in the man's eyes and mouth. Rand thought he could hear them roar. "Some call me Baal-Zaman." Rand found himself facing the door, jerking frantically at the handle. All thought of dreams had vanished. The Dark One! The door handle would not budge, but he kept twisting. "Are you the one?" Baal-Zaman said suddenly. "You cannot hide it from me forever. You cannot even hide yourself from me. Not on the highest mountain or in the deepest cave. I know you down to the smallest hair." Rand turned to face the man, to face Baal-Zaman. He swallowed hard. A nightmare. He reached back to give the door handle one last pull, then stood up straighter. "Are you expecting glory?" Baal-Zaman said. "Power? Did they tell you the eye of the world would serve you? What glory or power is there for a puppet? The strings that move you have been centuries weaving. Your father was chosen by the White Tower, like a stallion roped and led to his business. Your mother was no more than a broodmare to their plans. And those plans lead to your death." Rand's hands knotted in fists. "My father is a good man, and my mother was a good woman. Don't you talk about them." The flames laughed. "So there is some spirit in you after all. Perhaps you are the one. Little good it will do you. The Amerlin seat will use you until you are consumed, just as Davian was used, and Yorian Stonebow, and Gwer Amalasan, and Rowland Darksbane. Just as Loghain is being used. Used until there is nothing left of you." "I don't know." Rand swung his head from side to side. That one moment of clear thinking, born in anger, was gone. Even as he groped for it again, he could not remember how he had reached it the first time. His thoughts spun around and around. He seized one like a raft in the whirlpool. He forced the words out, his voice strengthening the further he went. "You are bound in Shayol Ghul. You and all the Forsaken. Bound by the Creator until the end of time." "The end of time," Baal-Zaman mocked. "You live like a beetle under a rock, and you think your slime is the universe. The death of time will bring me power such as you could not dream of, worm. You are bound. Fool! I have never been bound. The fires of his face roared so hot that Rand stepped back, sheltering behind his hands. The sweat on his palms dried from the heat. I stood at Lews Therin Kinslayer's shoulder when he did the deed that named him. It was I who told him to kill his wife and his children, and all his blood, and every living person who loved him or whom he loved. It was I who gave him the moment of sanity to know what he had done. Have you ever heard a man scream his soul away, worm? He could have struck at me then. He could not have won, but he could have tried. Instead, he called down his precious one power upon himself, so much that the earth split open and reared up Dragonmount to mark his tomb. 1,000 years later, I sent the Trollocs ravening south, and for 3 centuries they savaged the world. Those blind fools in Tar Valon said I was beaten in the end. But the Second Covenant, the Covenant of the 10 Nations, was shattered beyond remaking. And who was left to oppose me then? I whispered in Arthur Hawkwing's ear, and the length and breadth of the land Aes Sedai died. I whispered again, and the High King sent his armies across the Arith Ocean, across the World Sea, and sealed 2 dooms. The doom of his dream of one land and one people, and a doom yet to come. At his deathbed I was there when his counselors told him only Aes Sedai could save his life. I spoke, and he ordered his counselors to the stake. I spoke, and the High King's last words were to cry that Tar Valon must be destroyed. When men such as these could not stand against me, what chance do you have? A toad crouching beside a forest puddle. You will serve me, or you will dance on Aes Sedai strings until you die. And then you will be mine. The dead belong to me. No, Rand muttered. This is a dream. It is a dream. Do you think you are safe from me in your dreams? Look! Ba'alzamon pointed commandingly, and Rand's head turned to follow, although he did not turn it. He did not want to turn. The goblet was gone from the table. Where it had been, crouched a large rat, blinking at the light, sniffing the air warily. Ba'alzamon crooked his finger, and with a squeak, the rat arched its back, 4 paws lifting into the air while it balanced awkwardly on its hind feet. The finger curved more, and the rat toppled over, scrabbling frantically, pawing at nothing, squealing shrilly, its back bending, bending, bending. With a sharp snap, like the breaking of a twig, the rat trembled violently and was still, lying bent almost double. Rand swallowed. Anything can happen in a dream, he mumbled. Without looking, he swung his fist back against the door again. His hand hurt, but he still did not wake up. Then go to the Aes Sedai. Go to the White Tower and tell them. Tell the Amyrlin seat of this dream. The man laughed. Rand felt the heat of the flames on his face. That is one way to escape them. They will not use you then. No, not when they know that I know. But will they let you live to spread the tale of what they do? Are you a big enough fool to believe they will? The ashes of many like you are scattered on the slopes of Dragonmount. This is a dream, Rand said, panting. It's a dream, and I am going to wake up. Will you? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man's finger move to point at him. Will you indeed? The finger crooked, and Rand screamed as he arched backwards, every muscle in his body forcing him further. Will you ever wake again?